All right, welcome. This is a video clip that's going to talk about your first lab. So I am on your week at a glance for anatomy and physiology, and I would be looking, this video will be hyperlinked where it says video link 6 right here, right below this highlighting for video link 5, Scientific Methods Lab. Going to this from Google Classroom. Again, let me get us to Google Classroom. That's our Google site. Let's see. I'm on Classroom. And I'm going to go to 6th period and classwork. Get to my week at a glance so I can see all my attachments. I can see all of them right here with my virtual locker, my Zoom partner scavenger hunt, my digital notebook, my Edpuzzle about prosthetic arms. I would highly recommend just going to the Edpuzzle app because this could take you into 5th period if you're actually a 6th period student. So it's better just to go to the app and it will put you in the right period as well. One for chapter 1 organization, and then the 2 that are for the lab. So I'm going to open up these 2 that are for the lab. This one that you can kind of see here has a picture. It says 2020 scientific measurements. It's the procedure part of the lab, and this one over here is kind of the format that we'll follow for all labs. Sometimes this will be in a Word document like this one, as other times this is going to be as a Google form for you or a bigger template. It depends upon if you're writing this entire lab yourself or if this is a long-term project or if it's practice like for this lab. So in this lab, we're practicing scientific measurements and making some hypotheses about relationships on body parts that you're measuring. There are 3 total exercises. You can read through these. If you are not familiar with making slope and best fit lines, there is a link here for Khan Academy that's going to go through that and scatter plots. When we're in class, we'll be putting things into this spreadsheet so that everyone can see each other's data and make some statistical analyses of the information and comparisons. So in this first one, we're looking at weight versus height. So make a prediction about this. There's an example up here. Suppose you think a person's weight in kilograms is 25% of their height in centimeters. Yes, please try to use metric. So you might have to do some conversions of your pounds and your feet in inches. Let me know if you need help with that as well. Exercise 2, same exact thing, except for now we're going to look at the height compared to our arm length. So you're recording and comparing those 2 and looking at the difference between your expected and your observed arm length. So make some predictions and then measure it, and then let's look at how close you were to what you expected. And then study your weight and height in the morning versus the evening. Write a formal hypothesis, design a method of how you would test that, and then find out if it's supported or disproven. So these are just all kind of the procedure parts. Don't worry about answering these out next to each and every one of them. I will show you the actual format because I've taken all of this and put it into the format document itself. So this is mainly guidelines so you know what's going on with this lab. And I always think it's important to talk about why we should care. So NASA, for example, has a whole article here about biomechanics and anthropometry, which is these body measurements, the study of body measurements, and why we care about these topics. I think I just clicked. Yes, this is NASA. So you can kind of take a look at this and why they would want to know these types of measurements. And then this one is its significance to forensic science. So why do we care about this in forensic medicine and forensic science? These systematic ways of measuring body parts and dimensions. So that's just a little bit about why it might matter. If you go to the actual how to write up the lab, I have taken each one of those exercises, 1, 2, and 3, and put it in here. So this is where you would write a question. So you're taking those 2 things that you're comparing and coming up with a question. We are not going to do a formal background or introduction. If we were, we would go explore those two links and talk about in this section why we care about these measurements, why would they be important. But because this is a practice lab, I mainly want to see some measurements, some hypotheses and predictions made, things like that first. So here again, exercise 1, 2, and 3, where you're giving me a prediction reason. You don't have to stick with if, then, because. If you know how to write alternative hypotheses or null hypotheses or both, awesome, put those in here. But if you don't, I always, students tend to leave out this because part. So that is why I have all 3 components here so that I can check that you include something like this in your hypothesis statement. Your equipment and supplies goes here. So specifically, what did you use to do this experiment? And then list at least 2 controlled variables. If you've forgotten what those are, there's hyperlinks here to take you to video clips that will tell you. And is your experiment a fair test? There's a separate one here that will take you to an explanation about all of the variables and what does it mean to be a fair test. Manipulated variable, so what is the things that we're manipulating and changing versus what are we measuring? So what are these 2 variables that we're exploring in this experiment for each of the exercises 1, 2, and 3? And then our data tables. So we'll be renaming data tables and you'll be sharing them in groups and then coming up with some data and trends. Make sure that even if we don't have time to do more than 1 trial or more than 1 measurement, for example, if you're comparing that 3rd exercise in the morning versus night, that you still say that in your procedure, that you would try to do multiple trials and look at averages and comparisons. We are not going to do any experimental control in this experiment. And logical steps is telling us how you did it. For this section is where I think we're going to put our Flipgrid videos where you show me yourself doing it. So in under 1 minute and 30 seconds, probably I would say 30 seconds or so per exercise, you were just putting evidence here of doing it this time. As we get into other labs that you write yourself, you will have to give me diagrams and procedures where I can specifically repeat your experiment by looking at your procedure. For this one, we're just going to put a Flipgrid, most likely link, or a link to a video clip of you doing the exercises to get credit for the fact that you have actively done it yourself. And then lab safety, anything we should be keeping in mind when we're doing a lab. When we work with chemicals, we'll talk about safety data sheets and how to know how to handle those chemicals and what is PPE, your proper protective equipment for when you're working around certain equipment and supplies. And then a discussion. So this is, again, already in the original procedure, but we're going to look with an A, B, C, and D on your format so I can find each of these where you explicitly tell me if your hypothesis was supported, not supported, or inconclusive, and the data. So how do you know? So either normally we do both quantitative and qualitative data. This is really based on measurements, so we're just going to look over here at this quantitative data and references in our data table about those measurements. And then explain your answers in some sort of graph. So we're going to do those trend lines and see if we can see a relationship between those 2 variables. C, it says make suggestions, so at least 2 for future investigations. We'll do 2 in general for this lab. I have not done this lab before. This is a replacement for the things that we're unable to do in the classroom. And then problems that could have occurred that you think might have impacted your results. So there's always other confounding factors that could occur that I want you to be thinking about. So that's what goes in this D section, at least 2 things that could have influenced your results other than what you thought you were studying or measuring. And then your graphs, choosing the correct graph type. I believe one of your ed puzzles will be about how to determine which graph to use. And these are different ways to pick which graph and then how to label your graph. So these are talks or some of the things that I look for when I'm giving points, your earning points. A conclusion, and we aren't going to have citations for this particular lab, but we will have a conclusion. All right. And I don't think we'll be too worried with cleanup for this lab. That's what I have. Let me know if you have any questions or problems while doing this lab. And I'm available to answer any of those at office hours or during our live sessions.